Hello and welcome back to the Better Brain Blueprint. Today's episode is all about exercise and the environment, two huge variables in our brain health over which we have tremendous control. We'll be speaking about the powerful research showing how physical activity can supercharge our brains and help protect us against brain diseases. We'll also be exploring the recent studies demonstrating the negative effects of airborne toxins like smoke, indoor air pollution, and even things like incense on our brain health. Let's begin with an overview of the exercise-brain health link. Scientific research has been incredibly consistent in showing us the value of exercise. When I was in grade school, I was taught that exercise was important for heart health. Yet it's abundantly clear that moving our bodies is one of the most valuable things we can do to live longer, feel better, and think clearer. Regular physical activity has been linked to a lower risk for developing Alzheimer's, dementia, and depression, and at moderate levels, it appears to even lower inflammation. It also seems to increase levels of the protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, which in turn has been shown to promote new brain connections and even the growth of new neurons. Research in the last few years has shed light on the pathways connecting brain health and movement. For example, we now know that exercise appears to increase production of muscle molecules called myokines that appear to positively impact brain health. Exercise is also now thought to improve our brain's ability to use fuel like glucose, with recent data showing evidence for improved brain metabolism in people who regularly move their bodies. If all this isn't enough to get you up out of your chair and moving around, realize that a number of studies have found that even short bouts of exercise may enhance our brain power. When it comes to environmental effects on the brain, there's really a lot of very compelling research to keep in mind. For example, air pollution exposure has recently been deemed one of the top risk factors for development of dementia. But we also know that it's linked to worse test taking in children, more violent behavior, and more risk for depression. Similarly, air pollution in our homes, which can be created by our cook stoves or incense or even essential oil diffusers, may be generating hidden brain toxins that can poison us slowly. There's so much to explore here, so let's jump into this important episode. I am Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and this is the Better Brain Blueprint.
Having a healthier brain feels empowering.
Limitless.
Inspiring.
It feels peaceful and it feels hopeful.
It is so essential to your health.
Your brain is your greatest asset.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your life.
Improve your life.
There is no alternative.
Live better longer.
You deserve that.
In this episode, we'll be covering powerful, life-changing information. Remember, if you want full access to the Better Brain Blueprint now and for years to come, you can invest in the entire series, along with the exclusive bonus materials right now for a special price that is only available during this broadcast. Don't wait. Your brain will thank you. As much as we would like to believe otherwise, we're basically working with the same DNA today that we had tens or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. This means that while our environment has dramatically changed, our body's ability to handle those changes, it hasn't necessarily kept up. Toxins in our air, water, food, and more just didn't exist, especially at current levels, as recently as 100 years ago. So it's really no surprise that our bodies and our brains can have such trouble trying to deal with what's happening around us. Another important point to make here is that our brains are among the most sensitive organs to what's happening in the outside world. When we breathe in air pollution, those toxins can get into our bloodstream and impact our brain health. In fact, environmental airborne toxins are likely to be the single biggest hidden risk to our brain health. Simply put, what we put on our skin, what we put into our mouths, what we breathe in, and even what comes in through our eyes and ears all have a massive effect on our brain health and can impact our risk for conditions like depression and Alzheimer's. In particular, it's important to understand that our environmental inputs may significantly influence risk for autoimmune diseases. These conditions, which include multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and thyroid issues, now impact 50 million Americans and 1 in 10 people around the world, especially women. Autoimmune diseases can have either direct or indirect negative effects on the brain. This makes it absolutely vital that we pay attention to and try to ensure that what we're taking in from our environment is actually feeding our brains in a healthy way. If we don't, we may be at higher risk for all manner of brain diseases, especially immune-related issues like inflammation and autoimmunity.
We live in a situation where we are deeply associated with our DNA, our genome. And our genome has been incredibly refined for as long as there's been DNA. So, I mean, we're talking millions and millions of years. We don't know exactly when hominids arose, but if we want to focus on the human genome, let's say we're talking about several 100,000 years of refinement of our DNA to allow us to survive and procreate in the face of a given specific environment. And when we talk about environment, people think environment, well, they're thinking about the weather outside. What's the environment like? Well, the environment it really constitutes all of the influences that affect our health, that influence our DNA, that interact with our DNA, that interact with our gut bacteria, interact with their genetic material as well.
The question is as to why are we seeing more autoimmune disease? And I would say it's definitely driven by environment and lifestyle. A few years ago, you would read articles and they would say, oh, it's just that we haven't diagnosed people before, we didn't identify it. And that's just a bunch of garbage, quite honestly, because there is a definite increase in autoimmune disease. And there's so many different ones, it's almost hard to really track them all, close to 100 different types. And I would say that, autoimmunity is, of course, a disruption of our immune system's ability to ignore our own tissue. And what I mean by that is what our immune cells learn when they are naive or when they're still learning, like they're going to school, right? So they learn to ignore our own tissue and not react to it, and not attack it. And our immune system does a pretty good job of getting rid of those, what we call autoreactive cells. However, there's always a few, in the system. But, there's lots of different reasons why we think there's an increase, definitely toxicants in the environment because they can act as triggers. So we do know that.
Your external world is a reflection of your internal world. People know this anecdotally. If they clean their desk, you have clarity of thought. You clean your desktop, everything's in the right folder. You make your bed, you just have clarity of mind. And so I would say is Marie Kondo your mind, because the opposite is if you have a very dirty environment, very chaotic environment, and you're using mental energy to kind of remember where everything is, you could be feeling depleted for that very reason. You have too many tabs open, if you will, and it's still using up RAM, right? And processing space and speed. So I would say on a scale of 0 to 10, how clean is your environment? And clean environment could also be, a water filtration system or an air purifying system. Here in the, in the Northeast, occasionally we're getting some of the Canadian fires and stuff like that. And so we as best you can to have, clean air. Some people think that there's neurotoxins in some new furniture, that it's off gassing, these neurotoxins. So it's clean environment 0 to 10, because that could be affecting some people. We've covered on our podcast a few of the studies on EMF. That could be messing with some people because they can be more sensitive potentially. And we wonder why they're not reading faster, even if they're using a technique. It's just they're deficient or being challenged by their environment.
Environmental toxins can play a significant effect and difference in brain health. The reason being that many toxins are very specifically disruptive to brain health. They are called neurotoxins. And there are probably many more than we're aware of that have been measured so far. What we do know is that some environmental toxins disrupt your hormones. They are called xenoestrogens or foreign estrogens, and they're like estrogen evil twin. They come from the outside, they look like estrogen, they behave like estrogen in your body, but have really negative effects. And they have been linked to an increased rate of reproductive issues, thyroid disease, and even cancer. We've always had some pollutants and toxins since sort of the industrial age, but of course that's been exacerbated and increased in the past several decades. Also, there's climate change, which contributes to that as well in terms of our air quality and water quality, et cetera. And then there's our habits. and our technology. And technology is great, but we were never evolved to have this level of technology, which, in some cases can really separate us, can cause disconnection. It can cause us to be more sedentary. It really can do a lot of things that are not, healthy for our brain and our immune system. So I do think, it's a big topic to get into, but it's something that's well worth sort of diving deep into. Depending on where you live, you can be exposed to a lot of different issues. And currently, right now in the United States, anyway, we've had problems both on the West Coast and now on the East Coast as well from wildfires. And, when wildfires burn and also burn buildings and other things, not only are you getting a lot of the particulate carbon matter, et cetera, but you're also getting gases that might come from industrial chemicals burning too. And they're volatile. They basically are free radicals, so when you breathe them in, our respiratory tract, both in our nasal passages or lungs, are lined with the immune system is very rich on the surface of our mucosal surfaces of our respiratory tract. And so, yes, you can have things like asthma and problems associated with that chronic cough, but those things also get absorbed into our bloodstream and then can cause issues, everything from increases in cancer, potentially increases in autoimmune issues, also potentially problems with brain health. So I would say that is one source. But, also in our houses, even, our nice clean homes, we have so much off-gassing. And off-gassing, of course, is from, synthetic furniture, pillows, couches, rugs, vinyl flooring, your shower curtain, paint, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these were sort of swimming in this soup of potential chemicals that are going to affect our immune system and cause problems.
One thing that we know is that indoor air quality is always poor when we compare it to outdoor air quality. So outdoor air quality is always, well, I should caveat that, depending where you are, because if there's smog or if there are wildfires, there could be really poor outdoor air quality. But typically, to quote one of my professors, someone I learned a lot from, Walter Crinian, the solution to pollution is dilution. And what happens in an enclosed environment is that we get concentrated air. So if the flooring or the paints or the clothing, the new clothes we just bought or the new furniture we just bought is off-gassing, we're going to have a buildup of toxicity. The other thing is it doesn't rain in our houses, right? So outside, a lot of the herbicides and pesticides and things that get sprayed get washed away. But inside, they tend to accumulate in the carpet or in the flooring. Gas stoves, we're learning more and more about in terms of the gas exposure, also gas fireplaces. There are lots and lots of hidden toxins in our homes, also cleaning products, air fresheners, these kind of noxious scents that are very highly toxic to the nervous system, and they can go in through the olfactory nerve and create inflammation in the brain. The brain, for the vast majority of time humans have been on the planet, we have been hunters and gatherers and only exposed to very natural substances. This onslaught of new chemicals in the environment over the past 20, 30 years has done a number on our brains because we don't know how to metabolize them. We don't know what to do with them. And so the brain kind of goes alert, alert, alarm, alarm, unknown substance. What is this? Is it trying to kill me? And that will happen with things like Clorox and Pine Sol and all of these new smells and new chemicals.
Environmental exposures negatively impacting mental health could be anything from the foods that you eat that are exposed to certain chemicals. It could also be the environment in which you live. You might live in a city, but you might also be fortunate enough to live on a farm, a place where there's a lot of open air and fresh air and lots of greenery and near forest. But we all come from different circumstances, and I think we have to be careful about what our body and brain is exposed to. Environmental toxins, pollutants, smoke, smog, all of these things become extremely important for us to fend off because they ultimately affect our brain and body over time.
I want to take a moment to really allow what our experts have told you to sink in. We often think about the role of food on our brains, but how often are you considering the effect of all the potential brain toxins you're exposed to? We'll speak to this more later in the episode, but this should be a wake-up call for everyone to pay a whole lot more attention to their environmental exposures, especially to what they're breathing in, and in part because of the role of the immune system. We know that air pollutants can rev up immunity and may contribute to inflammation, which is linked to so many brain conditions and may increase risk for autoimmunity. Personally, I'm a big fan of my air purifier, and I also try whenever possible not to purchase products like air fresheners that can contribute to indoor air pollution. We've covered the topic of air pollution and why what you breathe in is such an important part of what makes your brain healthy or sick. But there are so many other variables in our environment that are really hidden in plain sight and may damage our brains. Now, I don't want to overwhelm or scare you, but it is really important to know about some of these things because the great news is that you can dramatically reduce your exposure. So how do brain toxins get into our water, show up in our toothpaste, get into our skin, and more? Let's find out.
Some of the things that, inadvertently can affect our brain health are not things that you would think of. For example, there's a substance called PFOA in cookware and certain types of nonstick cookware that over time manufacturers have learned that these are toxic for individuals who cook with these types of pots and pans and therefore replace them. So making sure that you're using a good quality cookware pan, even if you just have one, becomes really important to your brain health, because if not, chemicals are leaching into the pan as you're cooking, and these are not good for your body or your brain.
So we start looking at heavy metals, especially things like mercury, which is directly neurotoxic. We will also look at chemical toxins, whether they're petrochemicals, which are found in air pollution, right? But we look more specifically for herbicides, pesticides, those petrochemicals, things that might be found in groundwater, or glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. We know that many of these are active, direct neurotoxins. We also look at biotoxins. These are things found in water-damaged buildings primarily. They're the toxins made by mold. Now, what if you're in a water-damaged building and you're being exposed to that mycophenolic acid unknowingly when you don't want to suppress your immune function? Well, it can still happen. There are other toxins, mycotoxins, including aflatoxins, which is sometimes associated with peanuts and other foods, ochratoxin, which is associated with aspergillus and penicillium, zearalenone and trichothecenes associated with aspergillus, penicillium, and then also the black mold stachybotrys. So we look at these, and in my medical practice, I look very specifically for these because we can use different binders. So what we're thinking of here, I imagine it like a catcher's mitt. So if your body is exposed to these things, it wants to get it out. The cells know, they innately know how to get these toxins out and into the bloodstream so it can go to the liver and then go to the bowel. Once it's in the bowels, what we want to do is not reabsorb it because we don't want to take out yesterday's trash in addition to today's. So I imagine these binders that you can take orally, they're like a catcher's mitt. They catch that bile and they have an affinity. So certain binders are going to be better at catching mercury than a mold toxin. And so what we can do is individualize this and make it more precise so that we can speed up that process of getting these brain damaging toxins out of the body.
There is a process or a mechanism that's called systemic absorption. So whatever you put on your skin not only penetrates inside your body, but then is systemically redistributed throughout your entire body and in part to your brain as well. So it's something that people, I think, underestimate the importance of, and we just mindlessly go for products that, promise to make you look fantastic, but at the end, health is more important. And if you can find products that are safe and clean and effective, then why not? Today, there's so much choice. I think it's a no-brainer.
The problem is that in the United States, there are no laws that exist that require a new chemical to be proven to be non-harmful to humans, right? So, and that sounds really bizarre, but it's true. And so we have a lot of chemicals that were also grandfathered in, decades and decades ago that are still out there in the environment that are used every day in products that we know are definitely not safe. They're carcinogenic. They disrupt hormones. They can cause contribute to autoimmune disease development. The skin is a very big organ. We actually distribute medication through the skin. And when chemicals come in through the skin, our immune system has to recognize that and say, hey, is this harmful or is this something that's okay? And if it's something that it deems as being dangerous, it's going to then sort of send out a flare. It's going to tell other immune cells that this is a problem. It may take some of that toxin, create some antibodies against it. We know that this happens with heavy metals, for sure. We know that this happens with organophosphate pesticides and things like that. And this can all, cause inflammation and specifically everything from allergic reactions, autoimmune issues, and then, of course, in some cases, things like hormonal disruption, cancer, et cetera. So, we have to be really careful. And unfortunately, we have to be our own little watchdogs to make sure that we're reading labels and that we are understanding what we're putting on our skin.
Fluoride is a very, very sensitive topic. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a dentist or a patient. Everyone has an opinion on fluoride. And unfortunately, in the early days, they were just opinions. So we didn't have a lot of science. This was something that the profession came about, discovered by accident in a small town in Colorado that a lot of fluoride in the local water supply, it was well water, did lower the incidence of decay in children. It had other effects. It actually promoted decalcifications of teeth. It caused mottling of the teeth, brown and white spots. And then from that, it's a long, convoluted story through the Alcoa Corporation. There was some research done. Again, they were a big producer of fluoride in waste products, in manufacturing, aluminum, also big food, big ag. The fertilizer companies were producing a lot of fluoride. This seemed to connect very well where they could add fluoride to the water, like that little town in Colorado. And then that's how it came to be. There was no science. It was correlation, observationally decided that this would be a good thing for us. Roll forward to today, in the last decade, actually last 12, 13 years, we have almost 60 studies from all over the world. They pretty much all, within a few data points, have arrived at the same conclusion that in one very narrow aspect of the effect of fluoride, on our bodies is that it does cause permanent brain damage. So, for example, if you're a pregnant woman and you are drinking fluoridated water, that fluoride does actually get to your fetus. Obviously, it passes the blood-brain barrier and it gets into the brain, and the brain responds in several different ways. In such a way that it lowers the child's IQ by 4 to 9 points, depending on the study. There are a lot of countertop, inexpensive filters that can filter fluoride out of your tap water and other things as well. But it can be ingested, absorbed through the oral mucosa by using products that contain fluoride, like mouthwash and toothpaste. And the studies that relate to the absorption of fluoride and how quickly it occurs, within 10 minutes, your titer levels of fluoride in the blood are at their highest. And we now know that fluoride does cross the blood-brain barrier. And then the question is, what does it do to the brain? There are 10, 12 different mechanisms of how it can affect, for example, the mitochondria of your brain. These are severe consequences. And ultimately, we don't want to take the chance that our children's IQ are affected by that many points. This, trust me, this will become the new lead. 20 years ago, lead was a big deal. This is now the new lead, and we will eventually legislate it out in some way or some manner.
Having an unhealthy environment is such a big factor in brain health issues. Yet there's another danger to brain health that's absolutely worth mentioning. Because if you don't do this, you're putting your brain at unnecessary risk. However, doing this one thing for just a few minutes a day can dramatically enhance your brain health now and help prevent risk for brain health issues tomorrow and for the rest of your life. I'm talking, of course, about the incredible power of physical activity to create new neurons, new connections between neurons, balance immunity and lower inflammation, and just generally act as a supercharger for your brain health. This science is consistent and profound. So if you're someone who spends a lot of time sedentary, or just somebody who wants a high-functioning brain, this is definitely a message you want to hear.
Exercise is critical too. We see the role of both cardio, basically aerobic training, and strength training, improving brain function. It increases BDNF, it increases all the neural connections, neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. And I think, it's basically like miracle grow for the brain, which is amazing. The medical term is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So essentially increases both the formation of new brain cells and the connections between new brain cells. And so the complexity and the amount and the web-like nature of all these connections is what really determines your brain health. When you see, it's almost like pruning. When you see them older, their brains the connections prune, and the synapses are less, the dendritic connections are less. And so you sort of see this withering of the brain.
I recently wrote a blog that talked about a new medication that cut dementia risk by 50%. And I wrote the blog based upon a study that appeared in the Journal of the American Medical Association in September of 2022. And what this study looked at was a new medication called exercise. And what the researchers found was a British study that looked at, I think, close to 80,000 people, followed them for 7 years. And in these 80,000 people, they put on them what's called a wrist accelerometer. And basically, that's a device, you could probably have done with an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, that looks at how much you're moving in the course of a day. And what they found was that, interesting, they found two things. They found that those individuals who moved a lot during the course of their day had a dramatic reduction of risk for Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia by 50%. They cut their risk in half because they were active. But the other thing they found was really quite interesting, was that the physical activity was what we call dose dependent. What did it mean? It meant that the more you did, the lower was your risk. But yeah, at the higher ranges, the risk was reduced by 50%, but there was no lower limit. It meant that even a small amount above baseline of activity on a daily basis was also associated with a risk reduction for developing dementia. A very large study, 80,000 people, 7-year period of time. So what does it tell us? It tells us that physical activity is a powerful, powerful mechanism for preserving your brain. In a world where we don't have any pharmaceutical intervention that can be helpful in that regard, it means that you have to buy something. Maybe it's a new pair of sneakers. You've got to become more physically active. Nutrition's critically important, that's for sure. But just getting out and walking each day, as this study demonstrated, there was no lower threshold to the benefits of physical activity. So pretty empowering that at the higher levels of physical activity, risk for dementia was reduced by 50%.
Exercise is wonderful for stress reduction, especially aerobic exercise. So this is something that not everybody will enjoy necessarily, but I think it's something to consider when you have a lot of stress. Then doing some cardio or finding ways to get your heart rate up at least 20, maybe if you can 30 minutes a day.
Single-handedly, I believe that the greatest thing you can do to affect the quality of your brain is exercise. And when we look at exercise, we've got resistance training, we've got cardiovascular training, and then we've got neuroathletics, which is like neurocognitive training. We know that with 3 hours of aerobic physical activity per week, we can dramatically increase the amount of BDNF that we have in the brain. So BDNF is a growth factor for the brain. It helps with the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is this seahorse-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobes. We've got two because we've got 2 lobes, and this begins to decrease. It's one of the first things to go in Alzheimer's disease, but just as we get older, it seems to decrease both in the the amounts of neurons in there, but also in volume. So we can increase it in volume and in the amount of neurons through aerobic physical activity. So we need to make sure that we are getting adequate amount of aerobic physical activity. And not just that, what happens when we exercise? When we start to move our body, even if it's at 65% of our maximum heart rate, we are moving our muscles. We are getting more blood circulating around the body. What does that mean? That means more blood flow to the brain. And with more blood flow to the brain, we are getting more oxygen and nutrients. And we need that. We need the greatest amount of blood to be flowing to the brain as possible. And then we can move on to resistance training. Okay, so resistance training is, out of the three, I would say this is probably the most important one. This is the one I'm currently studying and researching and publishing about. So the results on resistance training on brain health are astronomical. And it's because of one particular pathway, and it's called the myokine pathway. So myokines are muscle-based proteins. So when you think about a muscle, and I'm talking about the actual muscle cell, when you contract it, let's talk about the biceps. When you contract your biceps, make them smaller, and you've got them under tension and under load. So let's just say you're holding a 10-kilo dumbbell and you're contracting your biceps. What happens is when it's under tension, they release many different kinds of myokines. Okay, they're also hormones, so they get released and they go into the bloodstream and they go up, and some of them can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. And when they do that, they go into different lobes of the brain. They can go into the frontal lobe and enhance executive functions. They can actually tell other myokines like BDNF. So for example, one myokine is called irisin. It's a messenger molecule that can actually tell BDNF to release more of it and then grow more neurons in the hippocampus. So these myokines are like, I try and tell people that they're like fertilizer for the brain. And in fact, this is actually really key. Pharmaceutical companies are trying to replicate these myokines. They're trying to get them in pill form because they know that if you get BDNF, for example, and inject it onto a brain cell of a mouse, it grows the brain. So, they're trying to do so much, as spending billions of dollars, but they can't. The only way to get these myokines is through hard level resistance training and aerobic physical activity.
On a scale of 0 to 10, how much are you moving throughout the day? Because in your not to do list is just being sedentary, is just binge watching stuff, into the late hours. Because as your body moves, your brain grooves. So for me, every hour I have to move. I have a rebounder, which is inexpensive right here in my office. The key to habits, and we do a whole section on how to create habits and how to break habits, the poor habits and disempowering habits, is you want to make the things that are good for you easy. And you want to make the things that are not so good for you more difficult. So how do I make movement easier? I have a kettlebell that I almost trip on in my doorway, but it just reminds me, or a chin-up bar right in my doorway, because it just reminds me it's very easy to kind of move. So on a scale of 0 to 10, how much are you moving throughout the day? Not just your exercise, because they say sitting is the new smoking. So how much are you moving throughout the day? Because that makes a big difference. When you're walking, even listening to this right now, it actually, they say they've done these studies of people on something elliptical or a bicycle doing a rhythmic walk, and you're listening to a podcast or an audiobook, you can actually retain it better and comprehend it better also as well. So as your body moves, your brain grooves. 0 to 10. But the opposite on your not to do list is being stationary.
Most people have heard of aerobic exercise, right? This is our cardio exercise where we're getting our heart rate up. This might be running or cycling or swimming or rowing or something like that. And then the second is strength training. Most people have thought about this and they think of like that big muscle man in the gym, right? But this might also include something like Pilates or yoga or bands or something that you've done with a physical therapist even. The two types of exercise that many people haven't heard of actually have a lot more potential to help your brain, and they don't usually take more time. So the third type that I want to introduce is the dual task exercises. This is when you combine both physical and cognitive engagement at the same time. And what's fun about this is you can get creative, because I have patients who have done this, I think, in infinite numbers of ways. you have to choose what's best for you. And again, this is going to change as your cognitive ability changes and as your physical ability changes. So the idea here is that at the same time you engage your body, so whether that is doing aerobic exercise or strength training exercise, and you engage your brain at the exact same time. And this potentiates the amount of benefit that you get out of the exercise itself. So we see increases in the studies, we see increases in people's ability to engage in activities of daily living. And any caregiver listening will know this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia.
The Better Brain Blueprint is all about empowering you to lead a longer, better, happier, and healthier life. No matter your health history, you have the ability to improve your brain function right now by incorporating the information from this series into your daily life. This cutting-edge information just isn't available anywhere else. And that's why owning all of the expert interviews, the transcripts, and the supporting materials is so incredibly valuable. I highly recommend making the Better Brain Blueprint, along with the bonus materials, part of your family library. By making some simple lifestyle changes, you can create lasting improvements in your health and in your life. These changes may not only lower your risk for conditions like Alzheimer's and mood disorders, they will almost certainly improve your brain function right now. You might notice that you start thinking more clearly, forgetting less, and generally feeling better throughout the day. Sometimes the hardest part in taking action and making these lifestyle changes is figuring out where to start. If you're ready to start right now, the bonus materials include resources that will help you apply this knowledge to your life, one step at a time. We interviewed the world's leaders in general brain health, mood disorders, Alzheimer's disease, and more. And we received some fantastic, actionable information from each of our experts. Unfortunately, we didn't have room to include it all in this series, but we know it's critical, life-changing information that has the power to transform your health. That's why the bonus materials also include the full-length interviews from all of the experts you've seen throughout this series. The great thing about owning this series is that you can easily share it with friends and family and watch their lives change too. In fact, if you found this series helpful, I invite you to share this broadcast event with a friend or with your loved ones. You just might change their lives and their destiny. The most important investment in your life is an investment in your health. Click the button on this page to invest in your Better Brain Blueprint today. We've learned a lot in this episode from our experts about the hidden dangers of air pollution, toxins in our cookware, unhealthy skin products, and even the potential that our toothpaste may be an issue. We also learned that a sedentary lifestyle is a major threat to brain health. But as I said, the great news about all of these things is that these are things we can significantly mitigate with simple steps. There are practical and straightforward tools and strategies we can all apply today that will dramatically enhance and protect your brain function. Let's find out exactly what you can do right now.
I think there's a lot in place now that can help consumers look for safer products for their skin and personal care. So as I said, there's a whole industry now that has sort of gone, taken that to heart and is being very careful about creating products that don't contain a lot of the real problematic chemicals. So I think the first thing is look at how many ingredients are in something. Less is more in this case, right? So if you can read and understand what the ingredient is, like if it says aloe vera or coconut oil or something versus something that has like 5 numbers in it and is 30 letters long, that's important. I think that there's a lot of information online now that you can look up. I always recommend the Environmental Working Group. I've probably recommended this thousands of times, but it's basically a citizens sort of watchdog group that analyzes and looks at many thousands and thousands of different products and really sort of gives them a grade, talks about what their potential issues are. So you can make, very educated decisions based on that. So I love their Skin Deep database. They always put out a safe sunscreen list every year. They're also the same people that put together the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, looking at pesticide residues on fruits and veggies. So, there are definitely things out there, but you have to invest a little bit of time and also understand that not always. Sometimes things can be a little bit more expensive, although, there are so many ways to actually make products at home for yourself, if you have a little bit of time. to make cleaning products for yourself, sort of the old fashioned way. So, just understanding that if you really value your immune health and you want to make sure that you're not taking in a lot of toxins, it takes a little effort, but you can do it. I say focus on your indoor air. And a big thing, of course, is maybe looking at what you're buying, making sure that it's not full of, say, flame retardants and it's not full of synthetics and you're using low VOC paint. And, there's lots of things that you can do. But also you want to make sure that you've of good air filtration system. So whether that's a good air filter that you have in your bedroom, in your living space, or if you have a whole house filter, all of those can be really helpful. There's been data in the past that have shown that certain plants can actually take in and reduce the amount of things like formaldehyde, which is also very prevalent in our home environments. So that's sort of the first place I would start.
I would say mold and air pollution are two things that we really need to be careful with that are preventable in some ways and to some extent. Mold is very common in so many homes, and it's something that you can treat. It needs to be detected, it needs to be addressed. It can have terrible consequences of brain health. And air pollution is a very insidious risk factor for dementia.
As I've said, there are several actionable next steps that we can all be taking to help protect our brains from environmental exposures. But I'd like to take a moment to outline some of these in further detail. First, as it relates to your air, ventilate your kitchen when cooking as much as possible. That means use your hood, your fans, and open the windows and consider an air purifier. Don't buy and use air fresheners. These are major contributors to indoor air pollution. They're also loaded with nasty stuff. Reduce exposure to indoor candles, especially scented candles, which release high levels of toxic VOCs. Minimize use of incense, and if you do use candles or incense, make sure it's in a well-ventilated room. When it comes to your skin, be careful with the lotions, creams, and other things you put on your skin each day, since these can be absorbed and can influence your skin's immune system. Consider vetting your products with the Environmental Working Group's Skin Deep database. With regard to your food, this same group, the Environmental Working Group, puts out some really helpful guidelines around which foods may have higher levels of pesticide residues. In addition, make sure to look at your cookware, since many non-stick coatings can contain unhealthy chemicals. Personally, I like a metal pan without a coating, which can be a cast iron or a stainless steel. When it comes to fending off sedentary behavior, I would really say there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Any movement is better than none. So that could be yoga, walking, swimming, one of my favorites, pickleball, or even just starting with stretching. The key is to find something you enjoy and want to stick with. So don't be put off by the idea that you have to do an hour of high-intensity interval training each day. Your brain is going to be so grateful for any movement. I'm so glad that you've joined us for this episode of the Better Brain Blueprint. I know I've learned so much from our experts about all the practical steps we can take to protect our brains from environmental toxins, as well as the value of physical activity. I want to emphasize this point again. It is not about perfection. It's about doing a little bit better. That could be as simple as not using an air freshener or just going for a short walk around the block. Remember, brain health is all about the simple things we do each day. And these are just a few of the many powerful steps that you can take to get your brain on a path towards better function today and for the rest of your life.
Brain health matters because it is the most important thing. And in life, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing.
Realize that you have immense power over your health and have the ability to change it at any moment.
Having a healthy brain feels absolutely limitless.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Better Brain Blueprint. I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next episode.